The need for California to shift from increasing the population sizes of its protected species impacted by climate change to aiding in the adaptation to climate change as a viable solution to sustainability. My name is Stephanie West. Today is 31 July 2021. The effectiveness of California's conservation planning methods and whether the sustainability of the state's protected species can be accomplished amid climatic and environmental impacts can be substantiated by answering just a few questions. Are the conservation plans for California's protected species still viable amid climate and environmental changes? Can the allocated resources distributed within the conservation plans for its protected species and be sustained long term? What new methods or approaches, if any, are being integrated into California's conservation plans that have not yet reached long-term objectives in population sustainability? Is climate change having an impact on resource distributions, and how is that affecting the implementation of new conservation plans within the state of California? Can all the challenges associated with mitigating population declines of California's protected species be attributed to climate change or the failure to adapt? Can conservation practitioners substantiate whether these protected species will survive or thrive in future climatic conditions? Though the answers to these questions may not be all-inclusive, conclusive research conducted on the limited factors of California's protected species and their conservation plans exhibit common themes relevant to climatic and environmental challenges that impede the objectives stated within the conservation plans. The most prevalent objective in each conservation plan is to mitigate the extirpation of California's threatened and endangered species by increasing their population sizes. Since much of the research refers to climate change as climatic or environmental variables, mitigating the extirpation of California's protected species by increasing the size of their populations may no longer be a viable solution to conservation challenges. Enabling protected species to adapt to climate change may prove to be more effective in ensuring the sustainment of their population. In order to put this into perspective, you must first evaluate and understand California's previous and current climatic conditions. A meta-analysis of both statistical and geographical data reports have shown that California has had record-breaking temperatures and increased periods of water shortages since the turn of the 21st century. A data analysis over the last 10 years showed that California's precipitation has been below average, and that those measurements coincide with California's driest years on record, which occurred between 2011 and 2016. The worst wildfires were recorded between 2000 and 2020, and the longest droughts ever recorded in California's state history occurred between 2012 and 2016. During that same time, over 4 million acres of land have been lost to wildfires in the past decade alone. To substantiate the viability of conservation planning and the conservation plans, each plan must allocate land and water resources for protected species. At the current rate of land loss and water shortages, sustaining large populations of protected species in the state of California pose challenges in the state's conservation planning methods. Many of the conservation plans analyzed for the purpose of this report are being reevaluated, revised, or the verbiage is being updated to reflect what the challenges in achieving the conservation plan objectives are. Nearly 90% of the conservation plans analyzed in this research attributed those challenges to climatic and environmental factors. Yet the objectives stated within each conservation plan did not wane from increasing population sizes, even though the procurement of resources allocated in the plans were decreasing. The verbiage within each conservation plan refers to climatic and environmental factors as variables. If the impacts of climate change are not accounted for within these conservation plans, how can increasing the number of species be considered a viable option in population sustainability for the future? The history and indications of California's climate change shows an increase of impacts to environmental or natural systems. Increasing the number of protected species to stabilize their populations in a climate that already decreases the chances of that species' survival in itself is a variable. The most viable solution to sustaining California's threatened and endangered species is to help them adapt to climate change. Certain species in California have already exhibited biological responses to climate change. Some species, through distributional and range shifting, showed very little effects of climate change, while others, i.e. aquatic species, are the most impacted by climate change and exhibit no methods in adaptation mechanisms. A list of data references correlating to these findings are available at the end of this research report. Analytical procedures that substantiate the data collected utilized mixed method research. In order to demonstrate what data is used and how it will be used, 12 conservation plans will be included and analyzed in this research. Each plan is specific to one of California's threatened or endangered species. Each plan was selected based on the year that specific species was listed under California's Department of Fish and Wildlife Endangered Species Act. Each conservation plan allocates resources necessitated by required habitats and specifies a time frame to achieve population sustainability for that species. The dates of California's worst droughts and wildfires on record over the last 12 years will be compared to the time frames established within the 12 conservation plans that have not reached their long-term goals of population sustainability within their established time frames. The column headings will include when the species was listed under the CDFW, the conservation plan implementation date, allocated resources including funding, the climatic conditions in California within the plan's parameters, which includes precipitation and temperature changes, management approaches or methodologies utilized to mitigate climatic and environmental variables stated within the plan, which includes systematic conservation methods that were once used, biological responses of each species attributed to those climatic changes, and the current status of each plan will be included in the research. A geographical data table will be used to highlight the habitual resources allocated to each species and if those resources have been impacted by droughts, wildfires, or have degraded in quality over time will also be included. A geographical survey from the California State Department will also be included in the research. A chart with axis labels depicting the biological responses of each species coinciding with California's climatic conditions over the past 12 years will be integrated into the data research chart. Each table, graph, and figure will attest to the effectiveness of past and current conservation planning methods utilized while mitigating impacts of climate change. The data will be utilized to substantiate whether distributional shifts and cases of refugia indicate the most viable method in conservation for the protected species is adaptation. The challenges associated with the challenges associated with the conservation of species and their habitats in the state of California have been inundated with climatic and environmental changes. Research shows that California was once considered a hotspot for biodiversity, but at the turn of the 21st century began exhibiting signs of climate change, unlike any other state in the U.S. Severe droughts and wildfires have destroyed land and degraded water resources, and while temperatures have increased, annual precipitation has decreased, leaving many of the protected species with limited or restricted access to resources that have been allocated within the conservation plans established to increase and sustain their populations. Conservation plans established within the last 12 years appear to show a decreasing number of success rates in reaching long-term sustainability objectives, and conservationists attribute those factors to continual climatic and environmental variables. If increasing the number of California's protected species and sustaining their populations are continually challenged due to the lack of resources and can't reach the objectives within the plan's timeframe due to continual impacts of climate change, are current conservation methodologies still viable, and what substantiates the viability of plan objectives? While climate change continues to affect protected species, increasing the population size of that species may not be a healthy nor a viable solution for those already struggling to survive in current climatic conditions. Aiding in their adaptation to climate change may prove to be a more viable approach to the preservation of California's protected species.